using the 4%. Shocking math behind financial independence. Let's say you save no money. You spend all that you'll make. How long will it take you to become financially independent? 0. So here's your income. And let me see how I can put your, I'll just put it like this. And this is your expenses. So they are identical. How much will we be saving every year? 0. How long will it take you? Infinite amount of time, right? So you got to be saving, you got to be spending less than you make in order to save money, in order to get this bucket of money, in order to get the safe withdrawal rate, in order to get your passive income greater than your expenses. So we've got to have some form of savings. So let's look at this possibility. Oh, and what if your expenses are greater than your income? Is that a good place to be? No, not a good place to be. Is it possible to have your expenses greater than your income? Is it possible to end up like, I don't know, this? Yes, how? How is it possible? Debt. Yeah, you borrow money, credit cards, auto loans, house loans, whatever you want. Loans. Borrow the money. Okay, that's the way to do it. So you've got to get your current income, your active income, to be less than your expenses. And I'm going to look in terms of percentages. So let's say this is 90% income. That is 90% of your income is spent on expenses. So you're saving 10%. Okay. At 10%, so let's look at, this is your savings rate. And this is going to have a couple of assumptions. So this assumes you invest your money at 8%. And we want to say years till financial independence. This is your savings rate. Let's say it's 10%. Any guesses as to how many years? Okay, so 50 years is one guess, and that's within an order of magnitude. Okay, so it's actually going to be like 39 years. So let's say you guys are what, around 22? You're gonna, let's say those of you who are seniors are getting a job, you start saving 10%, and basically 39 years from now, so you're what, 61? Then you're financially independent. Right about, you know, typical retirement age, right? However, let's look at what happens when you take your income and you reduce your expenses so that you're saving 80%. Sorry, you are spending 80% and saving 20%. So at 20%, the number goes down to 29 years. So all of a sudden, you're no longer 61, you're 51 when you're financially independent. The numbers here are independent of the amount of money you make. I have no legend on how high this income is. I am just looking at the rate of savings. Okay, so when you move from 10% savings rate to 20% savings rate, two things happen. One thing that happens is you're doubling the amount you're saving, right? And the one question is an 8% investment return high? Over 30 years, you know, it's about what the stock market tends to do. This number doesn't make a huge difference in these. We'd have to run it differently. I guess if you went from 8% to 1%, that would make a pretty substantial difference. But the higher your savings rate, the less it actually matters what your return is. But 8% is not hugely high. You could use maybe 6% is for sure achievable. So let's look at what happens when you go from 10% to 20%. One thing you're doing is you're saving more, right? But what's the other thing that's happening? Your target pot of money is reduced. Your target pot of money is reduced because your expenses are reduced. Let's say that your income, so we'll just put some numbers on here. Here it's 100K. This expenses then is 90K. Here the expenses are only 80K. So according to the formula I gave you, we would need to be looking at 90K times 250. But in this case, we only need to get to 80K times 250. So we're both saving more and needing less. So it's kind of a quadratic in some sense. Let's fill in this chart just a little more. Okay, 10% you could think of kind of as just a minimal savings rate. And 20% is a pretty good savings rate. But if you start increasing these numbers, you get some surprising effects. So at 30%, we are down to 23 years. At 40%, we are to 19 years. At 50%, you're down to 15 years. All right. So, and there are people who have savings rates this high. You might have, a couple that gets together and says, we're just saving one of our salaries. If you go extreme, many people would say 50% is extreme. If you go to, let's say, as much as 90%, well, let's just kind of look at this, right? Our numbers are, we've got something like this, and we've got something like this. So that says, for every dollar we spend, we're saving 9. We only need to get to 25. So even if we're earning no investment return, how many years is it going to take? So after year 1, we have 9 times our living expenses. After year 2, we have 18 times. After year 3, we have 27 times. And at that point, that hits this 4% rule for the definition of financially independent. Okay, I'm not suggesting that you save 90%. As I say, there are extreme financial independent people who suggest these very high percentages. But I also want to kind of show you that from 10 to 20 to 30 to 40, 50 makes a huge difference in how much you are saving. And in terms of how long until you get to this financial independence. Imagine, if you will, you're in a classroom. So this model assumes a constant spending rate. This model doesn't actually assume for how many years it takes. Yeah, I'm just looking at constant income and a constant spending rate. So I'm not looking at inflation in this case. So it is a somewhat simplified model. This is the average saving. So what I see is average saving rate dependent on income question. Can you, Jared, go ahead and say that out loud? Because I don't quite understand.
Oh yeah, is there just like, does the typical average savings rate for whatever work, or is it dependent at all on how much they actually earn, or does it tend to be kind of relatively the same?
So there's 2 questions onto that, I think, and let me try and answer both of them, or at least your question is maybe one of them, but there are 2 possible ways to interpret that. So one is, does this whole math, is it dependent at all on what the income actually is? And the answer is no, all it depends is on your savings rate. The other question is, does your savings rate depend on your income? And yes, it is certainly much harder to be saving 50% of your income at 30K than it is at 200K a year. All right. That being said, there are people that can do that either way. But in general, there are a lot of fixed costs that it's very hard to get rid of. And so one would expect savings rates to be higher for higher incomes. And to some extent that's true, but in general, most people spend most of what they make. And that's just human nature, I guess. So that tends to be the case.